How's it going, and welcome to No Fun Alloved's guide series on Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. In today's video, we will be taking a look at Chapter 6, The Caves of Hunger. There is a lot of things going on with this Caves of Hunger, located all the way near a certain location, but I'm not going to go ahead and say it until we get all the players out of here. So players that plan on playing in this adventure, do not stick around because this is going to be spoiler territory. But if you're a DM who is looking for added insights on how to run this chapter, go ahead and stick around because there is going to be a lot to cover. And here we are, located a whopping 40 miles away from civilization. That is the farthest location away from civilization besides O'Reilly's abode, of course. But the thing is, it's still a very long trek. It's going to take a tremendous amount of time to get there. So why are your players coming to the Caves of Hunger? After your players have been told about the fact that there is a lost city located in the Ragged Glacier, they need to go to O'Reilly's abode to get the key to open up the Ragged Glacier. They need the Codicil of White, the Rime of the Frostmaiden. After your players make their way to O'Reilly's abode, snatch the Codicil of White, and make their way back to the 10 towns, that is when they can go ahead and finally make the trek to the glacier itself. Now, who is directing them to go to all these places? As I previously mentioned, it should definitely be some Arcane Brotherhood member. Does not have to be Velen Harpel, of course. It could be anybody. If all the Arcane Brotherhood members are dead, or you just don't like them, then it can go ahead and be someone else. It could be one of the Professor Orbs, specifically Professor Scant. It could be a friend of the parties that is located in the 10 town somewhere. It could be anybody. But your players need to be told enough information that they're willing to act upon it, but you don't want to give them all the information that they know what they're going up against. So we have this little area listed here, Race to the Glacier. It states that for the chapter in particular, players should be level 8 when they go inside of the Caves of Hunger because there's going to be a lot they're going up against. And as we'll see later on, they can easily die if you put the hurt on them. So they should definitely be level 8 or level 9 when they make their way into the Caves of Hunger. And if you want your players to be on a more time-sensitive note here, you can go ahead and run the Elk and the Tiger here. And what it states is, as your players are making their way to the Cave of Hunger, a Elk tribe escort is going to appear before them and say, hey, you know, we're here to help you. We know that you need to get to the Ragged Glacier. We'll go ahead and help you out. And also, we know for a fact that the Tiger tribe is going to come and attack you, so we're here to help out. Your players might just go ahead and say, yeah, escort, sounds cool. Or they might just say, nah, we don't need you guys are weak, and then just go ahead and go on. It doesn't really matter. But if you are running this, then the Tiger Tribe is going to go ahead and ambush the party before they are able to get to the Caves of Hunger. So as it states here, it looks like this battle can go one of two ways. Either one, your players go ahead and stay for the fight, and in which case they just go ahead and deal with that in combat. Or you can go ahead and have it where the Elk Tribe says, hey, we'll hold them off, you go ahead and get out of here. In which case, off screen, you're going to have an event go on, and we get some nice information on how all that plays out. So I'm going to go ahead and say, though, the off-screen thing, it sounds really cool. You know, you get to basically go ahead and hand-wave it all and just say, you know, a whole bunch of people die and the Tiger Tribe survives, etc., etc. But if you run this actually as a combat, it is going to be a slog because, quite frankly, there's going to be a lot of bodies on the field, at least 30 some odd people here, you know, all the tribes members and all the leaders and, of course, all your players. It's going to be a slog in the sense that, you know, there's all these things to keep track of. But two, most important of all, individual tribes members are so pathetically weak that 8th level players are going to be able to deal with them absolutely no issue. So while this seems cool, like an event where your players are getting ambushed and, you know, they could go ahead and deal with it, quite frankly, they're not really dealing with much. So I would go ahead and say that if you actually want to present this as more of a challenge, go ahead and replace the stat block of the Ragged Hunters with something else, because Ragged Hunters are not doing much here. They've only got a +3 to attack, they've only got 12 AC, only 11 HP. You know, your players go ahead and cast 2 spells and already all of them are dead. The fighters and the barbarians and all that, they're killing them in single hits. You know, it really doesn't matter. So do whatever's best for your group. If you have a group that loves combat, then go ahead and run it. But if you have a group that is more into getting on with the main quest and is okay with letting the Elk Tribe deal with it, go ahead and do that as well. Another solution I have for dealing with this elk and tiger tribe conflict is if your players meet up with the elk tribe very early on in their travel all the way to the Caves of Hunger, and over the course of many days, the tiger tribe continuously ambushes them. I think that could be a lot more unique. You know, your players go ahead and travel a long distance, then they go ahead and set up camp for the night, and then an attack happens. But it's not a full-blown attack, it is more of a light skirmish in the dark, and your players have to go ahead and contend with that. And over the course of time, some tiger tribe members die, some elk tribe members die, and it's a war of attrition all the way to the Caves of Hunger. I think playing it up like that can certainly add a lot more flair than just a single battle. Once your players reach the spot where they know that the entrance is, then they can go ahead and call out the Rime of the Frostmaiden, a large poem that is pretty eloquent. You can go ahead and hand this to your players and they can go ahead and read it out loud, and you can totally make one person embarrassed as they have to go out and read this big old thing. You know, it's pretty intriguing. It is literally the namesake of this adventure, the Rime of the Frostmaiden. Here it is. It literally says right here, "Behold her everlasting rhyme." See how it covers all. Once the rhyme is spoken aloud, then you can go ahead and read out this little blurb that shows off that a crack forms and your players are finally able to make their way inside and make their way to the Caves of Hunger. The thing is, though, is if you haven't expressly told your players, oh yeah, we know that the Lost City is really deep in there, they might think to themselves that the city is going to be right there in front of them. They're probably not going to know what's ahead of them, and that is very awesome. You know, they'll be stepping into something where they have expectations of, oh, we're going to step into a city, but they are going to dive into an old school dungeon romp, and it is a great time. And here we are, the Caves of Hunger. In my opinion, a really well done dungeon design here. It's not linear in the sense that there's only one path. There are multiple paths. There are several offshoots, and it allows for some freedom. It allows for players that love 100% clearing stuff to find a whole bunch of fun stuff. And it also allows it for groups that want to just go ahead and track along. They can go ahead and skip a decent amount of content, which is perfectly fine. There is a lot of fun content to be had here, so let's go ahead and dive into what they'll find, shall we? For general features, we have ceilings. In most cavern ceilings are 30 feet high, but tunnel ceilings can range anywhere between 10 to 15 feet unless otherwise stated. Darkness. There is obviously no light in here, and so your players that are blind are going to have to go ahead and bust out those torches and light cantrips. Echoes. Because this place is so spacious and because of the walls, perception checks are actually made with advantage that rely on hearing, which is pretty good. And ice slides located all around in specific areas. There are ice slides that have been created by Reamer Hazes as they've burrowed their way through locations. They are easy to go down, no roll required, but if you want to climb back up them, you're going to have to use some climbing gear or something else to make your way back up. Throughout many locations in this area, you're going to have these little text blurbs that talk about Professor Scant giving some monologuing exposition to the players. If your players don't have Professor Scant with them, then you're going to be missing out on a lot of potential exposition. But, of course, if you have him and you just don't care about all that stuff, then you can go ahead and skip it as well. Psychic Hauntings. Located in many of these rooms, they'll have a prompt in the individual area that says, roll for a Psychic Haunting. And if you do so, you roll a dice. Once again, I believe this is a typo. It says roll a d20 and consult the Psychic Haunting table, but the Psychic Haunting table is a d12. And the way I know for a fact that's a typo is because you roll a d12, and then on a 7 through 12, nothing happens. So, yeah, definitely a typo. Now, these Psychic Hauntings are pretty cool, but because they are so limited, you can potentially run into them multiple times, or, you know, you just don't like the ones that you have here. Go ahead and throw some in your own. As stated here, none of them actually have any mechanical detriments. They're all just simply roleplay, fluff, and fun, and can get your players a bit on edge. So go ahead, and if you want to add some more to this, go ahead and add it. You know, if you want to add mechanics to it, you can, but it's perfectly fine not having to deal with that because as we'll be getting into in this chapter, there is a lot of things that can happen to your player characters that will affect them forever. And lastly here, we have Tekeli Lee, a Null Vampire. Because your players opened up the raided Glacier and caused a whole bunch of cracks to form, Icicle Lee has been released, and he is out now, and he is hungry. He'll be going around all over the Caves of Hunger, and he will attack the players, and this guy is terrifying. So why is this guy so terrifying? Well, there are several things here. First off, he's resistant to non-magical damage. Secondly, this guy hits pretty decently hard. He attacks multiple times and does a decent amount of damage. But the thing that really sucks here is the fact that he has the Sickening Gaze feature. The Sickening Gaze, the vampire targets one creature, a humanoid it can see within 30 feet of it. The target must succeed on DC 15 Constitution saving throw or be poisoned for 24 hours. And if you poison someone, that is huge. Disadvantage on all their attacks, massive stuff. And this isn't something that they can just save at the end of their turn. That is, they are poisoned for the next 24 hours. That is tremendous. He is weakening the party for the future battles to come. And specifically, his future battles to come. This guy is terrifying because his whole game plan is to run up to the party, punch one or two of them, get a Sickening Gaze off, and once the players have done too much damage to him, he's just going to go ahead and disappear. He's just going to run away and wait to regenerate, and time is on his side. He's got regeneration. Your players probably don't have regeneration. So this guy is constantly weakening the party, trying to poison all the party members. Eventually, at some point, he's going to try and poison them all. He's trying to, scatter them by using his Frightful Cackle. He's doing a bunch of damage. He's soaking up a lot of resources because your players are probably going to be casting spells and using class features. But this guy can continually harass the party, and that is good for him, but most importantly, bad for your players. So it states here you can go ahead and place Icicle Lee wherever you like, but if you want to be more of an arbiter of the rules, you can just go ahead and roll a d6 to determine where he is. In which case, your players could theoretically dodge him until the very end, because right at the very end, it does state that if your players haven't already fought him, then he'll at least try and fight the party once. But, if you play this guy up as your players are constantly going up against him in like every other room, and your players don't get the ability to short rest, and your players don't get the ability to stand around and cast, 10-minute spells or whatever, Icicle Lee is going to be a nightmare. He will kill a party if they do not have the ability to rest. So take that into consideration. Do you want to run this guy as hardcore as possible and have him keep dunking on the party? Or do you want to have him run off and not interact with the party until, an encounter or two afterward? So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into all these locations, shall we? Starting off with Area 1 into the Glacier. This is the area where your players go ahead and make their way through after they have just opened up the Rime of the Frostmaiden and said the words, and the Caves of Hunger opened up. If any Elk Tribe members are still alive at this point, they will go ahead and say, hey, we got your back, we'll go ahead and guard the entrance here, you guys go on ahead. In Area 2, we have the crashed Skycoach. The Skycoaches were essentially just mini airships that were able to move people around in the Netherese City, and obviously this thing was destroyed along with the crash. If your players make too much noise around here, they are going to incur the wrath of 4 Flameskulls that are nearby, and these Flameskulls are actually going to reunite with their bodies because their bodies are actually in Area 2. Pretty funny stuff. The thing is, though, is Flameskulls are pretty deadly, especially in mass. What makes Flameskulls so deadly is the fact that they can go ahead and cast Fireball. Now, a single Fireball for 8th level party members isn't that big of a deal. But if you are a vindictive DM and you are running it hardcore AF, then theoretically your players can get hit by 4 fireballs before they even know what's going on. And 4 fireballs is probably going to be enough to down at least a couple PCs, if not more. Now, what's really cool to find here is if your players go ahead and search all the wreckage, they'll be able to find a safe. And if your players go ahead and open up this safe, they will find a bag of holding, inside of which is 4 amethysts that are 100 gold each, and a Ring of the Ram, but the Ring of the Ram is made of Chardelin. So a bag of holding is a huge item. If you give it early on to your players, then they never have to worry about encumbrance or anything. More often than not, most groups don't even care about encumbrance, so bag of holding is just an excuse to have, no rule on that. But what's cool is here is the Ring of the Ram. The Ring of the Ram is a pretty awesome item. It basically just lets you make a +7 attack against someone, and they take 2d10 force damage and are pushed 5 feet away from you. Pretty cool stuff. But the thing about this item in particular is that it's made of Chardelin. Presumably at this point your players already know what Chardelin is doing, in which case they might be, tentative to actually taking this thing. But the Ring of the Ram could be a powerful item, and some people might be a little bit power hungry. Some people might not care about the negative effects of the Chardelin and just go ahead and take this Ring of the Ram. In Area 3, we have the Flameskulls. There is 2 offshoots to Area 2 here, and it states that there's 2 Flameskulls in the west area and 2 in the north area. So, Roll20 for some reason went ahead and just put the Flameskulls wherever. It's not that big of a deal, really. You can place them wherever you want. But of course, if you have groups that are a bit more cautious, then you should go ahead and make sure that they don't bump into all 4 at the same time. Descending down a staircase here, we have Area 4, Kobold Vampire Spawn. This is the first time your players are presumably going to find a Kobold Vampire Spawn because, they haven't popped up anywhere else in the adventure. This is the way you level up a low-level mob. This is truly awesome because more often than not, kobolds are just low-level content and then you never see them again. This is cool. This is definitely a must-have in future campaigns of mine for sure. This Kobold Vampire Spawn is going to go ahead and when it sees the party, it's going to hiss at them and then just run away because it's not dumb, it is one person and it's presumably going to go up against many people. It's going to go ahead and run away to its companions. If you have Professor Scant with you, then he can go ahead and say, "Oh, vampires, I know everything about these. Let me go ahead and tell you everything." And, you can go ahead and give any exposition dump you desire. In Area 5, we have Icicle Drop. When your players make their way in here, they'll be able to see a ruined tower. But as they move around, there will be a whole bunch of ice methods that are at the ceiling of this area. And they'll just go ahead and be little dicks and go ahead and make icicles try and fall on the party. At which point, your players have to make DC 12 dexterity saving throws or take 2d6 points of piercing damage. Not bad, really, but it does add up over time, especially because they can be going through a lot of resources climbing their way through the Caves of Hunger. In Area 6, we have the Ruined Tower. So what's really cool about this ruined tower is it is of course from the Netherese city, but as your players make their way inside of it, they'll be able to discover that this was a area for mages to rest and essentially get a free arcane recovery. Any character who takes a short rest in the tower regains 1 spell slot of 3rd level or lower at the end of the rest. A character can't regain this benefit again for another 24 hours. So nearly in the beginning of this area, we get this thing that lets you go ahead and regain some spell slots. Hopefully your players are near full, if not completely full, by the time they get here. But this is definitely an area where your players can go ahead and come back to once they get into some of the combats later, because potentially there's going to be a lot of combat later. What's also important to note here is that there is treasure here, and this treasure is a symbol of Mistral, who is the goddess of magic. The thing about Mistral is Mistral has a lot of significance with the Netherese Empire. It was because Mistral killed herself that a lot of shenanigans happened with the Netherese Empire. But also very importantly is the fact that if your players take this specific holy symbol, it can help them out in a fight later on. In Area 7, we have the Rubble Strewn Cave. This is basically just a connector that connects to 4 different paths that make its way out of this room. Nothing really too special. In Area 8, we have the Arcane Eye Activator. It states here that as your players make their way inside, your players will be able to see this little slab, and there's something written in Draconic. If they can read it, or if Professor Orb goes ahead and translate it, they will go ahead and say, "Take the free, self-guided tour of Yithrin. Press the eye to cast the spell." So what this does is, once you press it, it casts the Arcane Eye spell. And what is that? Well, what the Arcane Eye spell does is it lets you go ahead and create a invisible little sensor that you can go ahead and see through. And this is really dope because it allows you to go ahead and scout around. As an action, you can go ahead and just move the eye 30 feet in any direction. There is no limit to how far away the eye can move from you, but it can't enter another plane of existence. So in my mind, there are 3 ways you can go ahead and do this. 1, you go ahead and have your players cast Arcane Eye right here, in which case the sensor is right next to them, and then they can go ahead and scout around all of this area, should they desire. 2, you go ahead and have the Arcane Eye spell go ahead and make its way all the way to the lost city of Yithrin, in which case your player looks around and doesn't recognize where this is because they don't see it. And that'll be really cool if you go ahead and say that, you know, this slab was part of a building and now the Arcane Eye is inside of a building, and you go ahead and describe to them, okay, you move the eye a little bit here and you can see this dilapidated building. You go ahead and move it over there and you see a giant spire in the center of this city. That would be awesome. And third, I think a really fun ability you can have with this is go ahead and say that the Arcane Eye captured a bit of the past. You could have it be that when your players collect the Arcane Eye, instead of it being a self-guided tour, it could be basically a Disneyland theme park ride where your players get to see what the Ythryn city used to look like in its heyday as it was flying all around. If you do it this way, then you can go ahead and show off what life used to be like in the Netherese Empire. They'd be able to see all these wizards walking around. They'd be able to see some of the buildings that are sadly no longer there anymore. That is definitely a different approach you could take with this. You know, there is no wrong way of doing it. But mind you, no matter which way you do it, you have to consider, are you giving them too much information? Or are you okay with giving them the information that they can possibly receive from doing this? In Area 9, we have the Golems Head. Located in the city of Ythryn, there is an iron golem roaming around that is headless. Its head is located right here. The head obviously can't move on its own, so it's just simply going to sit here and do nothing all day. We of course get this good art to go ahead and showcase the size and scale of this thing, but also show off that it is still alive and still activated. Once your players make their way inside, they'll be able to see that this golem can go ahead and blink. Astute players will go ahead and say, blink once for yes and twice for no, you know. Hopefully your players are smart enough to do something like that, and if not, then go ahead and have some NPC with the party go ahead and suggest that. And this is a great way to go ahead and give your players some information. We get examples of questions that it would answer, such as, do you know where Ythryn is? No. Were you damaged when the city fell? Yes, etc., etc. This golem is not all-knowing. It's going to go ahead and simply say yes if it knows it, no if it knows it, and I don't know if it doesn't know it. Now, players might try and get creative in saying like, oh, maybe we can try and give this thing the ability to speak or do whatever. You know, there's a lot of different ways they can go ahead and approach it. Maybe they pull out a Ouija board and try and get it to like look at specific letters and try and spell stuff out. Your players may get creative, and if they get creative, then maybe you should reward them if they come up with something that elaborate, like a Ouija board, I guess. But if they don't, just go ahead and run it completely as is. In Area 10, we have the Toppled Spire. As your players make their way into this location, they'll of course see a Toppled Spire, but more importantly, they'll be able to see a large hole in the floor. Now, when you go ahead and tell them about this hole, you should tell them that, oh yeah, this is not something that you'd be able to walk down. You'd be sliding down like it's a slide. So if you tell them this and they're adventurous, they'll go ahead and just jump right in. But if you have more cautious people, they might go ahead and try setting up a rope system and climbing gear and make their way down slowly. If they go down without any remorse at all, then they must make a DC 15 strength saving throw, or else as they fly all the way through this cave, they will have way too much momentum and splash into the water down here. And that is really bad because, as we'll be getting to in Area 24, if you fall in that hole, especially if you're by yourself, you're as good as dead. For treasure in this area, we have a chest which your players can go ahead and easily open up, and they will go ahead and find 2 potions of superior healing, which they will definitely need at some point in this adventure. In Area 11, we have the Den of Shadows. In here, you'll never guess what's in this den. A bunch of shadows. But these shadows in particular are of individual Netherese people that resorted to cannibalism, and their spirits still linger here in this terrible form. They will go ahead and attack the party. So as a quick reminder for how shadows work, they attack. They've only got a +4 to attack, which isn't that big of a deal. But the thing is they strength drain. And how strength drain works is whenever they get a successful hit in, they reduce the target strength by 1d4 points. If your strength goes down to 0, you die. End of story, that's that. So more than likely for 8th and 9th level characters here, they're not going to get killed by the damage, because the damage is only on average 9. You know, it would require a lot of hits. More than likely, people would die if their strength gets reduced down significantly. Strength is a pretty popular dump stat because Dex is pretty good, and of course, not too many people need strength. So a wizard could potentially die in 2 hits if they're really unlucky. But what is really cool about this room is if your players have the holy symbol of Mistral and present it, then the shadows will be rebuked and they'll go ahead and recoil away, which is pretty awesome role playing. You know, if your players when found this item of Mistrals and start waving it around, you know, they could potentially save themselves some death. In Area 12, we have the Curse of Hunger. This one is a sleeper hit here. It doesn't have bold text about what's going on here, but it is terrifying. Anybody that walks into here automatically gets cursed. And what is this curse? Any creature that enters here feels intense hunger even after leaving the cave. Eating a handful of food keeps the creature's hunger at bay for 1 hour. If its hunger isn't satisfied within 1 minute, the creature must succeed on a DC 15 Constitution saving throw or gain 1 level of exhaustion. The thing is the saving throw must be repeated every hour until the creature succeeds or dies, or until the effect is ended on that creature by magic that can remove a curse. So this is huge. If you have someone that is not high in con save, they can easily die, and this is terrifying. Because presumably you're going to run out of food at some point, and this sucks. And most important of all, if you have to satisfy your hunger every hour, that means that's going to interrupt anything that you're trying to do, specifically sleep, you know. And that could be terrifying. Especially if you go ahead and decide that in the middle of combat they feel this hunger pain and have to waste a turn or two taking out some food and eating it. That would be pretty hilarious, honestly. Located inside this room as well, there is also a skeleton bearing a symbol of Mistrals, and if your players for some reason doubled back around here, came through the other side, they can go ahead and find this thing and use it before they reach the Shadow Room. In Area 13, we have the Icicle-filled cave. This place is filled with a whole bunch of icicles, but the reason why this is so intriguing is because as your players walk inside, they'll be able to hear all of the Kobold vampire spawn that are yipping away. If your players go ahead and generate enough noise by, you know, either talking to themselves, doing whatever, breaking all the icicles around them, then the Kobold vampire spawns are going to go ahead and come for the attack. Area 14, ice sculptures. Once your players look inside here, they'll be able to see a whole bunch of crude ice sculptures. And it doesn't take a genius to know that these crude ice sculptures were created with the intent to try and scare people. But the kobolds, of course, aren't too creative, and it only requires a DC 10 insight check in order to suss this out. If your players destroy any of these, of course, and have not already eluded the kobolds, then the kobolds are going to go ahead and rush in for the attack. Area 15, Drakareth's Doom. So, we get a nice little story here about Drakareth, who was a Netherese mage who took advantage of the destruction of Netheril and decided to kill a whole bunch of his compatriots, steal a whole bunch of magical items and knowledge, and proceeded to run out here, but unfortunately for him, he got killed by the cold. Once your players make their way inside here, they'll be able to hear this cool monologue coming from this wraith, and the wraith will go ahead and go on the offensive. Your players go ahead and fight this thing, and if it gets damaged enough, it's going to go ahead and fly through the walls all up in the northwest corner, and at which point your players only have the option of trying to break through the ice. Each foot of ice only is an AC of 13 with 18 HP, vulnerability to fire, immunity to cold, poison, and psychic damage. So your players can go ahead and bash their way in there and eventually get to this terrible wraith and put an end to it. But what's really cool about this is the items that they can get out of it. Should your players break through all 3 of the walls of ice, they can get their hands on a Mantle of Spell Resistance and a Staff of Charming, but the Staff of Charming is made out of Chardelin. Mantle of Spell Resistance, incredibly powerful item, advantage on all saving throws against spells while you wear this cloak. Fantastic stuff. Staff of the Charming, really powerful one as well. It gives you the ability to cast Charm Person, Command, and Comprehend Languages, and you have 10 charges, and it's using your DC. And if you fail a saving throw against being enchanted, you can go ahead and just say, nah, I didn't fail. That is really powerful. But once again, this is an item that's tied to Chardelin. Your players might possibly know that this is a really powerful item, but are they going to go ahead and say, hey, I want this item even if it makes me go crazy? That's really up to them. And specifically, it states here that anybody who attunes to the staff gains the following flaw. I like to give orders and expect to be obeyed. This flaw lasts until the attunement ends. So you get the Staff of Charming, and you think that you are a leader. You're like, oh yeah, do whatever I say, or else, you know, like that's pretty awesome. Area 16 Ice Cave is just yet another one of these locations that is a connector for all these other areas. As you can see here, the numbers don't really coincide with, you know, it going from left to right or up to down. In some of these locations here, the number of the area corresponding to where it actually is on the map is a little confusing. So you're going to have to make sure that you have the page ready to go and make sure you know where they are. In Area 17, we have the Den of the Vampire Spawn. It's here where if your players go through stealthily, they'll be able to find all of the Kobold spawn here. One of them could be from the first area if your players let that one get away. Of course, if your players already lured the vampires somewhere else, then go ahead and just not have to worry about any of the text around here. Except for the Stench of Death. The tunnel located to the south will contain the Stench of Death, and that could possibly lead your players down a rabbit hole to seeing more gross stuff. Traveling up north from that location, we have Area 18, the Snow Golems. Once your players make their way inside of here, they'll be able to find a whole bunch of Snow Golems, and these Snow Golems will go ahead and beat up on the party. Now, Snow Golems are a really cute stat block here. They, you know, only have a +4 to attack, but do a decent amount of damage. They have a snowball attack, which is really cute. It's only a +0, but it does 9 points of damage on average. And, you know, they're just fun little creatures. These creatures, unfortunately, are a little bit too weak at this point in the game, and your players can presumably destroy them all in a single fireball attack. But, you know, they are still fun creatures, and definitely something you should consider about running in any snow-themed adventure that you run. The Snow Golems will go ahead and chase players all around this area, but they will not leave Area 18, and they'll go ahead and just stick around to this specific area.